Okay. So, with this, with the nature of my simulated client here, the client is telling me that they want a uniform, kind of a uniform bob with a strong perimeter. They're obviously not using that language. They're just saying they want it to look thick and full and even. So first things first, when you're going to be doing a haircut like this, you want to make sure your client is fully level, not tilted in any way. You want to make sure that they're on a level surface. When I mean level, if you have a live client, obviously if you have your mannequin head, you want to make sure that their head, the line is nice and straight there. If you have a live client, you make sure that they're not tilting their spine in any way. You make sure that their shoulders and they're sitting in an ergonomic position, which is upright, and they have both of their feet settled on the floor. They're not crossing their legs. Okay, so you want to make sure that your client's never crossing their legs when you perform a haircut, because if they are, their spine is going to adjust for crossing their legs, and then you're going to have a haircut that's off because the spine adjusted and the client is not centered. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you're doing a cut, any cut, but particularly precision cuts, you're always monitoring your client's body posture, so you're able to maintain the best lines possible and consistent length throughout. And of course, you'll be cross-checking as well. So there's so many factors to take into consideration when you have a live client in the chair. What I would do is I would spend the bulk of my concentration for the haircut making sure that the perimeter was perfect and the length. I make sure that the perimeter was perfect and that my guide was set meticulously. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of hair throughout the entirety of the head. So basically around the outer perimeter, I'm taking out a little bit of hair, about a ½ inch of hair throughout. And I can already start to notice that there is different density in the front than there is in the back. It's a lot more sparse. So if you had your live client in the chair, you would let them know how long the front pieces are. And you would ask them whether they tuck it behind their ear or not, because sometimes clients will tuck their hair behind their ear, and if they have a bob and you made the bob sit evenly with the hair in a natural fall, just like this, and they tuck it behind their ear, it might look like there's a jump in the haircut. So you want to ask them if they're going to tuck it behind their ear or not. So if they are going to tuck it behind your ear, you're going to over direct the front hair and lay it down with the hairline, and you're going to pull it to where the ear is, and then you're going to set the guide there. So for the case of that, we're going to do that in this case. I'm going to go ahead and pull out my shears. This is going to be a haircut done with shears. And then hopefully we can use the texture shears, and we can go over some techniques for that. Okay, so we're setting a meticulous guideline, a guideline that gives me a consistent shape throughout. The first thing you want to do is make sure that all the hair is equally damp. The moisture levels are consistent throughout the hair. The reason being is because the moisture affects the elasticity of the hair. The technique would be consistent with curly hair as well as straight hair, so long as you're using the appropriate tension. So if you have curlier hair and you're gonna cut it wet, and because your client wears it in its natural shape more often than they wear it in a smooth shape, you would use a wide tooth comb and or zero tension in the haircut to get the same shape. Okay. Just looked at the chat. Thank you for that. Great. So let's go ahead and make our shape and take a look at what we have. We want to make sure that the shape is consistent. I'm looking at how long it is in the front. And we're going for a consistent shape around. And I'm noticing that I'm going to have to take about 1.5 inches in the front so the perimeter looks consistent in shape. So I will be doing so, making sure that my parts. Now, when it comes to parting the hair, in the book, they tell you to have it dead in the center when you're dealing with bobs and hair that gets styled a certain way with your clients. You always want to ask your client what parting they utilize, on what side do they part, do they switch it up, anything like that, because if they have a part that's dominant, you want the front to go with that parting, so when the bob sits, it sits at a consistent length with the part that they normally go with. Because then if you section it in the middle and then you cut it down the middle and then they like to flip it to the side, you have hair that looks layered in the front, okay? So in this case, our client's gonna be parted in the middle. We're gonna set our length. We're over directing the front hair back. And we're gonna go with very little tension. In some areas, it's about 1 inch off, and others it's close to 2 inches. Make sure your posture is consistent. You're squared up. She's completely, you're either going to be in front or completely behind or completely on the side of your simulated client. So you want to make sure she's squared up with you. And then with zero elevation, you create your guide. If you were working with curly hair, you could use the wide tooth comb and you could hold it in place and then you could cut. With the wide tooth comb, if you're dealing with curly hair, if you're dealing with more of a, if you want absolutely no tension whatsoever, you can comb it into place, and then with zero tension, you can use your comb as your ruler, and then you can go ahead and make your cut. Remember that with straight hair, it's not going to stretch as much as a curlier texture when it's wet. So you want to be very conservative when you cut curly hair, because the shrinkage can be more than 40%. Okay? So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and match our length on the other side. I'm looking at the length difference in the front here. I'm making sure my section is consistently damp. I'm over directing the front piece of hair back to where the ear is. So when I set my guide, if the client tucks her bob behind her ear or their bob behind their ear, you have a consistent length. I'm looking at the front. Making sure that my stance is consistent. And if you are concerned about being even, give yourself a little bit of extra leeway so you can compare and detail your length so you don't accidentally go too short. Perfect. So we've set the front. And now we're going to go ahead and set the back. So we look at the length difference from the front to back. And we see how much we're going to have to cut from the bottom perimeter. So it's going to be about she had a convex haircut before, so we're going to be taking a lot more off the back than we are the front. And what's nice is you can also double check your length from the front, also from the back over here, to make sure you're consistent when you pull the sections back for reference. And again, you can always give yourself a little extra leeway if you're concerned about making sure that it's even. You can identify your front guide. And you make your cut. And again, you always check for consistency. I'm not bringing any elevation up. I'm just making sure that I'm consistent throughout. See that? And now I can go ahead and start into, now that I've made sure that I'm consistent in length throughout the entire perimeter. Looks like I'm a little long. There we go. Consistent throughout my perimeter. Great. Great. We're going to drop, now we can start dropping our next sections. So now, what's really great about this is you have a little bit of your guideline everywhere. So it's less difficult to get lost. Again, making sure that I remain consistent in my moisture within the hair. Okay, so this is where if you were doing like a bob of some kind, now that you've set your perimeter, you would start to stack it around a 30 or 45 degree. And that's if you want it to have a bit of a little bit of a concave layering there. So you can take some from the very center, a section from the very center. You can take a look at your set guide, and you can pull to 45 degrees, cut, let it out. And again, it's tempting to want to move around like this, but we're not going to. We're going to stay squared up with your partner, or with your client. And you make sure that you remain consistent. And so you can do vertical sectioning, right? You can do vertical sectioning, or you can even pull out your section to 45 degrees, and you make sure that your guide drops out, right? and you can make sure that you don't take off too much because your guide is dropped out. And then you can take a look and comb it out. Because right here, these, you know, it's really easy to get stuck in an area and not be methodical and then accidentally go in and to cut your guide. So you want to make sure you're being careful and you have your guide plainly visible and you don't this same cut can be performed with a razor. You would make sure that your guide comes out and you cut the extra length out because you're going around your the outer perimeters to the doll, and you want to make sure that you don't accidentally cut your guide that you created for yourself right out here. So this way you can keep yourself organized and you're able to control the hair. Depending on the texture of the hair, you may take larger sections, or the density of the hair, you may take larger sections, or you may take smaller sections if needed. We are in the occipital area. And so where you hold your hand determines where your layering is going to end up. So if you notice, while I'm taking out my layers, I'm over directing my fingers down. Although I am stacking my bob at 45 degrees, I'm taking my fingers down to where my guide is instead of holding them at a 90 degree. And that changes how the layering would look. Okay, so if you want a more aggressive stack, you would hold your fingers at a 90 degree and you would cut in the layers using your guide so you have a blended haircut. Or if you're going for a more conservative bob, you have your 45 degree angle and then you move your fingers downwards to match the length of your guide. Which is what I am doing. Here. Okay, great. All right, so you can see that we're keeping our shape consistent. All right. Depending on your client, you'll have either more or less hair to deal with as you move up. This client's gonna have less. You want to make sure you comb from the roots out so you get equal tension throughout your haircut. That's why the moisture level and making sure that the hair is damp at the same rate throughout is important. And I'm noticing that one side has more density than the other. This is common in simulated clients as well as live clients. I'm getting into the crown area now. Making sure my moisture is consistent, how damp the hair is. And it's common that if you have a client with damaged hair or dry hair, you may have to put a cutting lotion in or a little bit of leave-in conditioner. In the case of this simulated client, I did put in some leave-in conditioner before to ensure that the hair was easy to work with. You shouldn't feel like you're fighting the hair ever. It should always feel like you're able to comb through it freely and easily. Making sure I cross-check and that I'm even. Couple little stray hair there. Okay, great. So now, if you notice, we're around the area around the ear. This is a good place to start creating the same weight line that you have in the back in the front. So this way you keep your shape consistent and you give the client the illusion of very, very full hair in the front. And remaining mindful of them tucking it behind their ear. You drop down however much hair is needed to create a visibly similar perimeter to the back. That's the goal, is that the perimeter in the front looks just as thick as the perimeter in the back. So that keeps the haircut looking consistent. All right. If you notice, I'm making sure that my sectioning is consistent now around the crown. This helps me, again, maintain the shape, not lose myself, and to also make sure that the perimeter in the front is matching the perimeter in the back. This type of sectioning helped me when I was, while I was cutting in the salon, to make sure I kept myself even and accountable for the shape at all times. Because, you know, when you're layering and you think about the nature of the cut that you're working with, you get caught up in the terminology. Oh, this is a 45 degree, this is a stacked bob. You get caught up in the terminology. And sometimes out of autopilot, you go in and layer something because you've been trained to layer in those areas, and the density, I'm going to go ahead and lower my client, the density and the hairline does not call for being layered in those areas. So if you notice now that I'm in the crown, I have layers that are far too short. I have layers that are far too short to come down to the bottom to be layered at either a conservative 45 degree angle. So when I blow dry, I can either go in and marry the layers once it's fully styled, or I can take pivot point sections and I can point cut into the jump that we just experienced, because if you saw, we go from a certain length. There's like a point here. Oh, I don't know if you can see. There's a point in the layering. The layering, it's so hard to see, but the layering comes to a point, and that's the jump point to where the layering on the top is shorter than the layering on the bottom. So what you do to smooth that out so it doesn't look like a jump point is, instead of having it be a triangle point, you have it go into a rounded layer by point cutting. So we can do that once we finish the top and the sides. All right. Literally just a little 1 or 2 hairs long. You can see that the layers match up to what we have going on here. All right, great, and boom. Notice we have a consistent bob cut around. We're going to marry the layering on top that's way short into what we have. So we have something seamless. What you do is you take pivot sections from the apex. The apex is the highest point of the head. So you would take triangular pivot sections, being mindful of the hairline transitioning from front to back. So we're gonna do the back first with our pivot section. You look at the length at the start point of your pivot section. You start to pull up your section pretty much at around a 90 degree. And then what you do is you literally just point cut any sort of point, sharp point that you see in the transition between the layers. And then that way, when you comb it down, it gives you a beautiful blend. And you're able to do that, I would say with this simulated client, you're gonna have about 5 pivot point sections where you do this. And when you point cut, what you do is you're only opening and closing your shear with your thumb, so you get a consistent line on the bottom. And when you're point cutting, you close your shears as you're pulling away. So you're closing your shears as you pull away. You're not closing your shears as you dig in, okay? So when you point cut, be mindful of the technique. The technique is you basically slide cutting as you pull away for point cut.
I have a question.
Go ahead, would you mind writing it down, and I will happily address it right after I'm finished?
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm looking at my sides here, and I'm looking at the length shift difference between my sides. And I recognize that there is pieces here that are really short, and it looks like there's a little bit of a hole from before, from just either breakage or anything. I didn't go ahead and layer any of that. I just let it out. So what we can do is the heavy point, which is right next to it, can get a little bit of layering. So the transition is not as obvious between a finer section and a thicker section. So right here, you're able to still marry what the side looks like by looking at the area that's much thicker. And you can do things like you can slide cut some of the weight off in specific areas. And then when you drop it, it gives you a much more blended outcome between the two areas. All right, great. So this concludes my consistent square bob. I will be